and he earned in the region of $20 million plus for the book Spare. And there was that original Netflix deal. But of course, we now know that the Sussexes have been unilaterally dumped by Netflix. Is it conceivable that the Sussexes could eventually run out of money?
Absolutely. I mean, the cost of living for them is enormous. I mean, the security alone, which they feel they need, must cost between $1.5 and $2 million a year.
For months, whispers followed Meghan Markle through royal corridors, but one conversation remained sealed behind palace doors. King Charles had reportedly delivered a warning so private, so emotionally charged, that even senior courtiers were kept outside. Now, the silence surrounding that message was beginning to fracture. The tension had not appeared overnight. It had grown slowly, through every disagreement over protocol, every public statement, and every moment when Meghan and Prince Harry challenged expectations that had governed royal life for generations. To Meghan, those expectations often felt suffocating, a system demanding silence, obedience, and sacrifice without offering protection in return. To the palace, however, her resistance looked increasingly dangerous. This was no longer simply a struggle between one woman and an ancient institution. It had become a battle between personal freedom and the survival of the crown's authority. Charles had tried to keep that battle from reaching Meghan directly. At first, he spoke privately with Harry, believing a father-to-son conversation could calm the growing anger. He hoped Harry would persuade Meghan to step back, lower the temperature, and avoid another public confrontation. But Harry was no longer willing to act as the palace's messenger. He defended his wife fiercely, even as he sensed something changing in his father. Charles was becoming colder, less patient, more aware that every private disagreement carried the threat of becoming tomorrow's headline. Then came reports of a message delivered through a tightly controlled channel. There was no official meeting, no recorded appointment, and no broad circle of advisors. Only a handful of trusted aides allegedly knew it existed. They were instructed not to mention it in emails, briefing notes, or written schedules. The warning had to leave almost no trace. Meghan soon understood that the palace was watching more closely than before. Her interviews, public comments, personal contacts, and possible future projects were being examined for signs of what she might reveal next. To her, it may have felt like surveillance. To Charles, it was damage control before an irreversible breach. Harry stood painfully between them. He wanted to protect Meghan from a family she believed had failed her, yet he could also see that Charles was no longer reacting only as a wounded father. He was acting as king. And what frightened him was not another embarrassing story. He feared Meghan was approaching a boundary tied to royal power, private family agreements, hidden decisions, and the future reputation of the monarchy itself. The warning, those close to the situation believed, contained one direct request. Not a suggestion, not an invitation to negotiate. An instruction Meghan was expected to follow without argument. But before the exact words of Charles's warning could emerge, the palace had to confront the deeper question of what Meghan was allegedly preparing to reveal, and why Charles believed it had to be stopped. Charles's warning did not come from nowhere. Behind the carefully staged ceremonies and polished family appearances, Meghan had reportedly begun asking questions the palace considered dangerous. They were not questions about dresses, titles, or seating plans. They reached into inheritance, private agreements, and decisions never meant for public examination. What had started as frustration was becoming something far more serious. Meghan allegedly wanted to understand how royal wealth was divided, who controlled access to family residences, and why certain privileges appeared permanent for some relatives but uncertain for others. The monarchy presented itself as a clear hierarchy, yet behind closed doors, its true system was far less simple. Influence did not always follow titles. Protection was not guaranteed by blood. Access depended on trust, loyalty, and above all, silence, That unwritten structure reportedly disturbed Meghan. She questioned why some members of the family continued receiving institutional support even after controversy, while Harry's place seemed to grow weaker with every disagreement. Why were doors kept open for some, but quietly closed for him? Why did certain promises appear flexible once he challenged the palace? To Meghan, the pattern looked deeply personal. To royal officials, her questions sounded like the beginning of an accusation. Then the concerns moved beyond Harry. Meghan may have become aware of private conversations about Archie and Lilibet, their future connection to the monarchy, the limits of their involvement, and what privileges they might or might not inherit. Nothing had been publicly confirmed, but the possibility alone was enough to deepen her suspicion. She was no longer examining only her own treatment. She was looking at what the system might mean for her children. Palace aides reportedly grew alarmed when they learned Meghan had begun organizing records from her royal years. Messages, notes, private recollections. Details that seemed harmless in isolation but could become explosive when placed together. She knew who had promised support, who had withdrawn it, and which decisions had been explained differently in public and private. Charles understood the danger immediately. A family disagreement could survive behind closed doors. A detailed public account could become something else entirely, a challenge to his reign and a shadow over William's future. Harry, however, did not initially see how far the anxiety had spread. He believed the conflict still centered on press intrusion and personal treatment. He did not realize Meghan's questions had reached the foundations of royal power. Then an unnamed courtier delivered the warning Charles could no longer ignore. Meghan was allegedly preparing to discuss a subject the family had always controlled through silence. As concern spread through the palace, Charles faced a decision he had spent months avoiding: whether to continue speaking through Harry or address Meghan directly before the situation moved beyond his control. There was no official summons, no dramatic arrival at Buckingham Palace, and no public sign that a confrontation was underway. Charles chose something quieter, a message passed through trusted hands, stripped of ceremony and royal language, reached Meghan privately, and its very secrecy revealed how serious the situation had become. Charles had reportedly rejected the idea of a formal meeting almost immediately. A scheduled audience would create records, staff would know, advisors would ask questions, and witnesses would remember who entered, who left, and how long the conversation lasted. In a family where even silence could become a headline, he could not risk the warning leaking before Meghan had heard it. So the message allegedly traveled through someone trusted by both sides, an intermediary familiar with Harry's emotions and Charles's authority. This person was not simply carrying words. They were carrying the weight of a family already close to breaking. The communication was kept away from larger palace departments. No broad briefing, no chain of secretaries, no carefully polished statement written by committee. Charles wanted control over every word because he was speaking in two voices at once. One belonged to a father desperate to stop the final collapse of his relationship with Harry. The other belonged to a monarch defending an institution that could not survive endless private revelations. When Meghan learned the warning had come directly from Charles, the meaning changed. It was no longer the advice of a nervous courtier or the threat of a palace lawyer. It had come from the king himself. But Meghan reportedly saw the secrecy as proof of fear. If the palace was confident in its actions, why hide the message? Why avoid records? Why speak through private channels instead of confronting her openly? Charles believed privacy was his final chance to prevent another public battle. Meghan may have believed it showed how deeply the palace feared her version of events. Harry's reaction added another layer of pain. He allegedly discovered the message only after Meghan had received it. Once again, a decision involving his wife and his family had been made around him. To Charles, bypassing Harry avoided another argument. To Harry, it felt like exclusion, and perhaps even betrayal. William was suspected of knowing that contact had been made, yet he reportedly refused to intervene. In his view, Charles had already allowed too many family disputes to become emotional negotiations, only for the details to surface later. Still, those close to the exchange remembered one part more clearly than the rest. A single sentence, brief, final, and impossible to misunderstand. The mystery would not survive forever. When the central sentence finally escaped the circle of secrecy, it revealed not only what Charles wanted Meghan to stop, but what he feared would happen if she refused. The message was brief, but its meaning was devastating. Charles had not begged Meghan to return, apologize, or disappear. He had warned her to stop before private pain became permanent destruction. And now, with those words exposed, the public could finally see how close the royal family had come to complete collapse. At the center of the warning was one sentence: "Stop before there is nothing left to protect." It was not wrapped in ceremony or softened by royal language. Charles was allegedly urging Meghan to stop preparing, encouraging, or releasing further disclosures about private conversations inside the family. But the warning reached far beyond palace reputation. Charles was talking about Harry's remaining relationship with his father, his damaged bond with William, and his fading place within the wider royal family. Another major public attack, the message suggested, would not simply create another difficult news cycle. It would permanently change how the monarchy dealt with both Harry and Meghan. Future access could be restricted. Private communication could become rare. Family invitations might disappear. Even sensitive discussions involving money, property, and long-term arrangements could be pushed behind firmer barriers. Charles was no longer speaking about temporary anger. He was describing consequences. That was what made the message so painful. It sounded like an order from a king defending the crown. Yet beneath it was the voice of a father watching his family disintegrate. Charles appeared to be saying that some damage could still be repaired, but only if the public revelations stopped now. Meghan reportedly heard something very different. To her, the palace was asking her to protect an institution that had failed to protect her. Silence, in her view, had never been neutral. It had defended the powerful while leaving her and Harry to face suspicion, criticism, and humiliation alone. Harry reacted with anger. He believed the monarchy had used silence as a shield for generations, while expecting him and Meghan to absorb every accusation without answering. Why, he questioned. Should they protect private royal conversations when the palace had not protected their private pain? Then came the deeper twist. Charles' warning may not have concerned interviews alone. It allegedly touched information connected to inheritance arrangements, private promises, and assurances made before Harry left Britain, matters that could raise questions about who had been told what and when. Meghan did not respond immediately. Her silence left Charles uncertain. Had the warning frightened her, enraged her, or convinced her that she was closer to the truth than the palace wanted? Soon afterward, officials noticed a sudden shift in the Sussexes' public strategy. Certain comments stopped. Possible appearances were reconsidered. Plans seemed to slow. The warning had landed, but no one knew whether it had prevented the next explosion or merely delayed it. Yet the warning's release answered only the first mystery. The greater shock was what happened afterward, when Meghan's silence forced Charles, Harry, and William to prepare for three very different kinds of war. Charles expected resistance, outrage, perhaps even another public accusation. Instead, Meghan became quiet. Interviews were reconsidered, statements were delayed, and conversations shifted behind closed doors. But inside the palace, no one mistook silence for surrender. They feared she was preparing something far more controlled and far more difficult to contain. Meghan reportedly understood that an immediate response would give the palace exactly what it expected. Anger could be used against her. Defiance could be framed as revenge. So rather than react, she began to examine the warning piece by piece, asking which parts of her royal experience she could speak about freely, and which details might expose her to legal threats, private pressure, or institutional retaliation. Harry wanted a faster answer. He believed silence would allow the palace to shape the story first, presenting Charles as a wounded father and Meghan as the danger he had tried to contain. But Meghan allegedly argued that speed would make them vulnerable. A rushed statement could be dismissed as emotional. A carefully prepared response would be harder to attack. The warning also deepened her belief that the monarchy still expected obedience from her, even after she had stepped away from royal duties. She was no longer working for the institution, yet it still appeared to believe it could decide what she was allowed to say. To Meghan, that was not reconciliation. It was control wearing the language of concern. She reportedly considered replying through a private letter, not an interview, not a public accusation. A direct response to Charles that would force him to confront her words without the protection of advisors or palace statements. But even that possibility divided her and Harry. He still hoped some private bond with his father could be saved. Meghan feared every new contact was simply another attempt to manage them. For a brief time, Charles interpreted the silence as hope. He believed the warning may have worked, and that the family had stepped back from another devastating confrontation. His advisors were less convinced. They warned that Meghan's restraint could be tactical, giving her time to organize records, consult trusted figures, and prepare a narrative far stronger than an angry public reply. Then the secret began to move beyond the family. People in media and entertainment circles allegedly heard that Charles had sent a private warning. The details were incomplete, but curiosity was growing. Someone close to the Sussexes reportedly argued that the message proved the palace feared Meghan's account because it contained something the monarchy could not easily explain. And then came the first unmistakable sign of betrayal. Meghan had not publicly announced the warning. Harry had not confirmed it, yet its central meaning had escaped. Someone inside the private chain had broken the silence. The question was no longer whether Charles had sent the warning. The question was who exposed it, and whether the leak came from Meghan's world, Harry's circle, or from inside the palace itself. When the warning surfaced, suspicion moved faster than truth. Charles believed only a tiny number of people knew the wording. Harry believed the palace had leaked it to humiliate Meghan. Meghan suspected the message had been designed to become public from the beginning. Every explanation pointed toward betrayal, and every betrayal led back to family. Charles reportedly reacted with private fury. The message had been passed through a narrow circle, deliberately protected from official schedules and wider palace departments. Yet now its meaning was circulating beyond those walls. He demanded to know who had seen it, who had repeated it, and whether any written copy had survived. Aides were allegedly instructed to trace every step of the communication. Names were reviewed, conversations were reconsidered, even trusted figures came under quiet suspicion. But the more the palace searched, the more dangerous the situation became, because every possible answer threatened someone close to the king. Harry's conclusion came quickly. He believed palace officials had released selective details to make Charles appear restrained and compassionate while presenting Meghan as the force pushing the family toward destruction. To Harry, the leak was not accidental. It was another carefully managed story. Meghan questioned something even darker. Had the warning ever truly been private? Or had secrecy simply made it more powerful when it finally emerged? If the palace wanted to pressure her without making a formal threat, leaking the message could force her into silence while allowing Charles to deny any public campaign against her. William reportedly watched the crisis with growing frustration. Another private family dispute had become a threat to the monarchy's stability. Every leak weakened trust. Every accusation pulled the crown deeper into a conflict that could damage his own future reign. One theory pointed toward a courtier close to Charles, someone who may have revealed the warning to prove how far the king had gone to stop another public battle. Another pointed in the opposite direction. Someone sympathetic to Meghan may have exposed it to show that the palace was still trying to control her voice. No proof settled either possibility, but Charles's suspicion increasingly fell on Harry. Previous private conversations had entered public narratives before, and even without evidence, the pattern felt impossible for him to ignore. Harry, in turn, felt he was no longer being treated as a son. He was being handled like a security risk. After the leak, communication reportedly tightened further. Messages became shorter. Intermediaries became more important. Emotional honesty disappeared behind caution. And soon, the consequences would reach far beyond interviews or headlines. With trust shattered and every private conversation now considered a potential weapon, the palace moved toward a colder solution, one that would redefine Harry and Meghan's connection to the monarchy forever. There was no dramatic announcement and no decree read from the palace steps. The consequences arrived quietly. Calls became shorter. Invitations became uncertain. Private details stopped flowing. Charles had warned Meghan that there might soon be nothing left to protect, and now the monarchy was beginning to remove what remained. Inside the palace, informal contact was reportedly reduced almost at once. Friendly messages became controlled updates. Casual conversations were replaced by carefully worded exchanges. Staff who once spoke freely with Harry and Meghan were told to limit what they shared, not only to prevent another leak, but to avoid every misunderstanding becoming a fresh accusation. Future invitations allegedly came with invisible conditions. Privacy had to be protected. Security arrangements had to remain confidential. Media access could not be negotiated through public pressure. Even family occasions were no longer treated as simple gatherings. Every appearance carried risk, and every absence carried meaning. Charles withdrew further. The emotionally open conversations Harry still hoped for were replaced by advisors, intermediaries, and narrow channels. A father who once tried to explain himself was now speaking through a system designed to protect the crown. That distance gave Charles greater control, but it also stripped away what remained of the relationship beneath the titles. Reports suggested that discussions involving residences, inheritance expectations, and long-term royal privileges were placed under tighter secrecy. Harry slowly began to understand that the warning had never been only about Meghan's words. It had marked a final boundary before something colder, institutional separation. Meghan refused to accept that she had caused the collapse. From her perspective, the palace had chosen punishment over accountability. She believed the monarchy was closing doors because it could not answer the questions she had raised. Silence, once again, was being demanded from those outside, while power remained protected within. William reportedly supported the stronger boundaries. He believed the monarchy could not survive if every private disagreement became public material. To him, distance was no longer cruelty. It was defense. Yet the cost was brutal. Charles became more secure as king, while becoming more distant as a father. Harry retained his freedom, but lost the private access he once assumed would never disappear. And as trust faded, Archie and Lilibet's future connection to royal life grew more uncertain. Still, the palace could not fully relax. Meghan may have remained silent, but she still possessed memories, messages, and private knowledge powerful enough to restart the conflict at any moment. That left one question hanging over them all. Had Charles's warning prevented destruction, or had it accelerated the rupture he feared most? As the palace doors narrowed and the family retreated into separate worlds, one final truth remained. The warning had escaped, but its most painful consequences were only beginning to reveal themselves. Charles's warning was meant to save what remained of a family. Instead, its exposure revealed how little remained to save. Meghan felt threatened, Harry felt abandoned, William felt vindicated, and Charles stood between the crown he had inherited and the sun he could no longer reach without fear. The phrase "nothing left to protect" had always carried more than one meaning. It referred to trust that had survived years of anger, relationships weakened by public accusation, and the small amount of private access Harry still retained. It also pointed towards something deeper: his emotional connection to Britain, the family identity he had carried since birth, and the possibility that one day he might still find a way back. The warning changed how the conflict was understood. The public split had appeared final long before, yet this message suggested private negotiations had continued in secret. Behind the headlines, Charles had still been trying to reach his son. Harry had still been hoping for recognition. Meghan had still been testing whether the institution would ever acknowledge her pain. But the leak destroyed the fragile safety those conversations required. Meghan emerged neither defeated nor reconciled. Instead, she appeared more convinced that the monarchy viewed her voice as a threat. To her, Charles's demand for silence confirmed that the palace feared not exaggeration, but exposure. Harry faced a harsher realization. In defending Meghan, he had sacrificed almost every secure connection to his former life. The access, protection, and family certainty he once believed permanent had become conditional. He had chosen freedom, but freedom had come with isolation. Charles achieved temporary silence, yet found no peace inside it. The disclosures slowed, but trust did not return. He had gained control as king while losing the ability to speak naturally to his son. William saw a different lesson. When family loyalty and institutional survival could no longer exist together, the institution had to come first. Emotional negotiation had failed, and stronger boundaries had followed. From that moment, every private word became dangerous. A conversation could become evidence. A letter could become accusation. A memory could become public content. Honest reconciliation became nearly impossible because neither side could speak without fearing how the words might later be used. The conflict itself now risked becoming an inheritance, unresolved pain passing from Charles to Harry, and perhaps one day reaching Archie and Lilibet. And somewhere beyond public knowledge, Meghan's complete response may still exist. A letter never released. A conversation never confirmed. A final account containing the very information Charles feared. That was the cruel irony. The warning was hidden because secrecy was supposed to protect the family. Once exposed, it revealed a family already divided beyond recognition. And until Meghan reveals what Charles feared she might say, the message will remain more than a warning. It will remain evidence that the monarchy's most dangerous secrets are often hidden inside its most personal wounds.